Looking Forth, episode 37. The purpose of this podcast is to go through our Come Follow Me readings in the Doctrine and Covenants and find ways to follow our prophet, President Nelson's invitation to prepare for the coming of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This week we're reading in Doctrine and Covenants 103 through 105. We're going to start in D&C 103 verses 1 through 3. This is talking about Zion, this entire section, just like 105 is also talking about Zion and its redemption. Let's go to verses 1 through 3 first. Quote, "Verily I say unto you, my friends, behold, I will give unto you a revelation and commandment, that you may know how to act in the discharge of your duties concerning the salvation and redemption of your brethren, who have been scattered on the land of Zion, being driven and smitten by the hands of mine enemies, on whom I will pour out my wrath without measure in mine own due time. For I have suffered them thus far, that they might fill up the measure of their iniquities, that their cup might be full." End quote. So in here, the question I would ask you is, did the Lord God pour out his wrath upon his enemies who scattered the saints? And will he do that again? So first of all, to answer the question, did God pour out his wrath upon those who scattered the saints? The answer is yes. The Lord, 30 years later, poured out his wrath through the Civil War. Now, the Lord didn't cause the Civil War, but the Lord could have stopped or mitigated the Civil War. Instead, he let the people move forward with the wickedness that they were doing. And nowhere in the Civil War was there more brutal fighting and destruction than in Missouri. The people in the north of Missouri and the people in the south of Missouri were literally divided against each other and were constantly raiding each other, destroying each other's settlements. It was brutal. And the Lord did pour out his wrath through that. More important to us, is he going to pour out his wrath again? So to answer that, we're going to have to go through D&C 103 and 105. But I want you thinking about that. Will that happen again, that the Lord is going to pour out his wrath without measure? So some may say, well, not everyone who drove the saints out of Missouri maybe had the full measure of the Lord's wrath. Some might have, some might not have. So I think there's a possibility that the full measure of this is going to come in the future. And possibly for those who were there, who escaped the Civil War and lived in Missouri, then the fullness of that wrath might not come until they're in the spirit world. Here we have a promise that the Lord is going to do this. And of course, he did and he will, and we'll see the answer to this by the end of this podcast. Let's go now to verses 7 through 8. This is really interesting to me because I love when the Lord makes promises and I have to ask myself, did the Lord fulfill that already? Or is that yet to be fulfilled? Or is it partially fulfilled? Anyways, let's go to it. Quote, "And by hearkening to observe all the words which I, the Lord their God, shall speak unto them, they shall never cease to prevail again until the kingdoms of the world are subdued under my feet, and the earth is given unto the saints to possess it forever and ever. But inasmuch as they keep not my commandments, and hearken not to observe all my words, the kingdoms of the world shall prevail against them." So here the they is the saints, and the promise is that if they hearken to observe all the words which the Lord has spoken unto them, they will never stop prevailing or winning until the kingdoms of the world are subdued. And inversely, and the Lord does this all throughout the scriptures, he gives a blessing on one hand and a cursing. The blessing if you follow and the cursing if you don't. And so the cursing is that if they don't keep his commandments and observe all his words, the kingdoms of the world shall prevail against them. So which do you think it is? Have the saints since the time of Missouri prevailed against the world and the kingdoms of the world? Or have the kingdoms of the world prevailed against the saints? Or has there been a mixture of those? So that's really important because if the saints prevailed against the kingdoms of the world, where are we now? And if the saints haven't prevailed against the kingdoms of the world, why is that? And what do we need to do so that we can? So we'll answer this over time as well. So think about that. And as we go on, we'll answer that. Or at least I will give you my opinion, and you can answer it on your own, because that's what's important, is that you, through the Spirit, find the right answer. All right, let's go to verses 11 through 12 now. Here's the question: will we return to Zion as a place? Quote, "But verily I say unto you, I have decreed that your brethren, which have been scattered, shall return to the lands of their inheritances, and shall build up the waste places of Zion. For after much tribulation, as I have said unto you in a former commandment, cometh the blessing." End quote. So, are we going to go back? This sure seems to say that yes, we are. And it even seems to say that yes, those who were there at that time are going to return there. Well, wait a minute. How can that happen? Because it's been long after the death of everyone who was involved in the early settling of Missouri. The Lord often has multiple ways to fulfill prophecy. Here, first of all, talking about us as a church. In many places in the Doctrine and Covenants, as well as many church talks from apostles and prophets, you see them saying, we will return back to Jackson County, Missouri. We will build up the New Jerusalem and Zion there. That is absolutely corroborated in multiple places. So there's no doubt of that. That will happen. Now, the question is, what about those that he's talking about here? He says, your brethren. So we could say your brethren means just the members of the church. But here it could also mean those who were actually scattered from Missouri at this time. Well, the Lord has a way for that to happen. When the Lord comes again to Jackson County, to his temple, which is his first, second coming appearance, he is going to bring to pass the resurrection of the celestial and the terrestrial at that time. And so those of their brethren who fit those two categories, the celestial and terrestrial, will be resurrected, and they can return to live in their inheritances. This is something interesting, is that when we build up the New Jerusalem and Zion, it's not just going to be mortals who are members of the church who are living there throughout the millennium. You are going to have mortals living there. You're going to have transfigured mortals who are living there, or translated mortals. And you're also going to have resurrected beings who at least will live there part-time, who will visit there and may live there for a time. So you'll have all those types of people there. So this can be another fulfillment of this promise that the Lord gives us. All right, now let's go to verses 15 through 18. So how will God redeem Zion as a place? Well, the Lord uses parallels, shadows, types, where he says something that is going to happen in the future is a lot like something that happened in the past. Of course, the Book of Mormon is the biggest type and shadow for us of what's going to happen prior to the second coming. But there's other types and shadows all throughout the scriptures. And so the Lord uses one of those here in verses 15 through 18. Let's read it and see how he does that. Quote, "Behold, I say unto you, the redemption of Zion must needs come by power. Therefore, I will raise up unto my people a man who shall lead them, like as Moses led the children of Israel. For ye are the children of Israel, and the seed of Abraham, and ye must needs be led out of bondage by power and with a stretched out arm. And as your fathers were led at the first, even so shall the redemption of Zion be." End quote. So the redemption of Zion absolutely is going to happen as a place, and the Lord to do it is going to bring his power into play, and to a degree that he likens to Moses leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. And so this is where the Lord is using this parallel, this type of the Exodus, and saying, you know how my power happened during the Exodus? Well, that's how it's going to happen in the redemption of Zion. And once again, many quotes from apostles and prophets modern day who back this up, that say that when we as a church go back to build up the New Jerusalem, it's going to be with God's power, definitely more powerfully than what was seen in the exodus of the children of Israel led by Moses. And why I say definitely there is because, one, President Nelson has told us that some of the greatest miracles are coming between when he said that and the second coming. And here the Lord gives a couple of other promises where he says that it's going to be more powerful. He says that in verses 19 through 20. This is going to be, as he says, with a stretched out arm. and we're going to be led like our fathers were. That's how the redemption of Zion is going to be. It's not going to be us one by one just kind of going back there. It's not going to be just a church making peace and buying up the land and slowly taking it over. This is going to be one of those tribulation years, powerful miracles that the Lord is going to use to show forth his arm in the eyes of all the nations. And we can look to this and learn a couple of things to prepare ourselves, because if you feel as I do, this is something that our prophet has said we need to be preparing for, because this comes before the second coming of Jesus Christ to the New Jerusalem. First, the New Jerusalem has to be built. And first, before we build it, we have to go there. So you can see this is something that I feel is not very far in our future. So preparing for this is something that's really going to help us. Here's something that was said by Orson Pratt in March of 1873. You can find it in the Journal of Discourses, Volume 15. Quote, "God will shield us by his power if we are to be led forth out of bondage as our fathers were led at the first. This indicates that there may be bondage ahead, and that the Latter-day Saints may see severe times, and that unless we keep the commandments of God, we may be brought into circumstances that will cause our hearts to tremble within us. That is, those who are not upright before God. But if this people should be brought into bondage, as the Israelites were in ancient days, Zion must be led forth out of bondage, as Israel was at the first. In order to do this, God has prophesied that he will raise up a man like unto Moses, who shall lead his people therefrom." Here's Orson Pratt once again talking about this, and the important thing that stood out to me is him talking about the fact that this bondage that we will need to be in if we're going to be led out of bondage like the children of Israel. Now, we've talked in a previous podcast about ways that we could be in bondage financially or to unjust laws or to other things. The bondage that he's talking about here, I believe, is going to be that much greater than whatever we're in bondage to at this point. The reason for that is if you look at why the Lord was needed to get the children of Israel out of Egypt by power, it's because they could not do it in any other way. Now, the bondage that we're in today, perhaps we start making more money. We pay off our debts. Perhaps we are able to convince our politicians to change unjust laws. There's ways that that could be done. This bondage will not be something that we're able to free ourselves from. We will literally need a savior. And the Lord, sending a type or sign for himself, will send a man like unto Moses. This will definitely be a member of the church, a leader in the church who will be appointed to this role. We don't know who that is, and Orson Pratt in this talk says, I don't know who it is. I thought it would be Joseph, and then I thought it might be Brigham, but we don't know who it is. The important thing is the Lord is promising to do this, and there is no way we're going to mistake when this happens. Those who are faithful and are chosen to go and redeem Zion as a place, it's going to be by power. You will definitely recognize it. It will be something that will be so powerful that you won't go back and wow about all of the miracles in the book of Exodus anymore, because you will have seen them and your children will have seen them to such a greater degree. So very cool to look at that and think about how that is going to happen. All right, let's go now to verses 21 through 22. This is about Joseph Smith's role in the original Zion's camp and parallels in the future. Quote, "Verily, verily, I say unto you that my servant Joseph Smith, Jr., is the man to whom I liken the servant to whom the Lord of the vineyard spake in the parable which I have given unto you. Therefore let my servant Joseph Smith, Jr., say unto the strength of my house, my young men, and the middle-aged, gather yourselves together unto the land of Zion, upon the land which I have bought with money, that has been consecrated unto me." End quote. So Joseph Smith, of course, gathered Zion's camp in fulfillment of this. However, Zion's camp did not go with the same level of power as the children of Israel, and in the end, they were not able to deliver the saints in Missouri at that time. The reason for that we'll go over in 105, but it was primarily because the saints there in Missouri were not living up to the laws. They were not hearkening. And so the persecutors who were kicking them out were prevailing over them. The kings of the world were prevailing over the church. And so the Lord said to Zion's camp, go back. You've given your sacrifice, and I accept it. Here, Joseph Smith in the past was the man who led this group. And here, if you look at the footnotes for this, the man here that he's talking about is the parable in D&C 101. He's this servant who says, go and gather the residue. This is interesting to me because several of the modern day apostles have mentioned that Joseph Smith, in the last times before the redemption of Zion in the future, would be brought back along with others, and that they would select those who would go back and redeem Zion. And so it very much seems like this is going to be a type where what Joseph did in gathering the first Zion's camp is going to be a type or shadow for what's going to happen in the future when the future gathering happens and a new Zion's camp is going to have to be sent ahead. Joseph would have to return either as a righteous spirit or as a resurrected body. Either could be possible. And he might personally lead that group, or he might call someone to lead that group and set them apart for that. We don't know exactly because no more has been revealed on that. If you look at verse 35, though, this same section 103, we'll read this, quote, "Therefore, as I said unto you, ask and ye shall receive. Pray earnestly that peradventure my servant Joseph Smith Jr. may go with you and preside in the midst of my people and organize my kingdom upon the consecrated land and establish the children of Zion upon the laws and commandments which have been and which shall be given unto you." And so here again, I think this is evidence that the Lord is going to call Joseph Smith once again to have a part in this redeeming of Zion. And that could be in several different ways. We don't know for sure, but you can read this. You can let the Spirit whisper to you how that might happen. The Lord here spoke through Orson Pratt in this talk of March 1873, Journal Discourses 15, and talked about this. God's arm is not shortened, that he cannot raise him up. The him here is Joseph Smith. Even from the tomb, we are living in the dispensation of the fullness of times, the dispensation of the resurrection. And there may be some who will wake from their tombs for certain purposes, and to bring to pass certain transactions on the earth decreed by the great Jehovah. And if the Lord sees proper to bring forth that man just before the winding up scene to lead forth the army of Israel, he will do so. And if he feels disposed to send him forth as a spiritual personage to lead the camp of Israel to the land of their inheritance, all right. End quote. So we don't know for sure. These are the ideas that Orson Pratt had about that. Now let's go on to verse 23. So here, what I want to ask you as we read this, was this done in the past or will it be in the future? What we're going to read. Quote, "And let all the churches send up wise men with their monies and purchase lands even as I have commanded them." End quote. Here the Lord is saying that the churches need to send their monies and purchase these lands. The question is, did that happen in the past? When this revelation was received, did the churches listen and did they go and purchase more lands? And did they do it to the degree that the Lord had meant? And will that happen in the future? The truth is, I don't know that that has been revealed, but I think those who are into church history could probably tell what's been done in the past. But I think it's possible that it also could happen in the future. The church, of course, may have been purchasing land out in Missouri for the last 100 years. I'm not sure. But this is interesting to look at because this is a part of what the Lord's promising to come. Verses 27 through 28. So as you look at this, what does it mean to lay down your life? Quote, "Let no man be afraid to lay down his life for my sake. For whoso layeth down his life for my sake shall find it again. And whoso is not willing to lay down his life for my sake is not my disciple." End quote. So when I read this, I always thought at first, well, lay down your life means to die for the cause. And certainly there were saints who died for the cause in Missouri. But go here and look at this word life and click on it. Look at the footnote, and this is what it says in Luke 14:33. "So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple." End quote. So obviously the Lord is saying more than just our physical lives. Laying down your life means forsaking all that you have. This is talking about total consecration. Consecration of yourself, of all of your monies, of all of your time for the Lord's sake. And he says very strongly that if we're not willing to do that, we're not his disciple. So I think the Lord is patient with us as we learn to get to that point. But brothers and sisters, we've got to learn that that's the end point, and we need to be moving intentionally to get there, because the Lord expects this kind of consecration of those who are going to go back and redeem Zion. And I think partly that is why his power is going to be shown forth. And partly it will be able to be shown forth, that level of miracles, because the people who are chosen to go, perhaps by Joseph, will be ones who are consecrated to the point where they have the faith to allow those miracles to occur. All right, now we're going to go to D&C 104. So as much as D&C 103 and 105 are about the redemption of Zion, D&C 104 is about consecration, and it's not a coincidence that this is sandwiched in between the two sections about redeeming Zion. This is necessary, absolutely essential for the redemption of Zion. So let's start with verse 1. Quote, "Verily I say unto you, my friends, I give unto you counsel and a commandment concerning all the properties which belong to the order which I commanded to be organized and established to be a united order and an everlasting order for the benefit of my church and for the salvation of men until I come." End quote. I did some emphasis there because I want you to realize this is meant to be something that didn't just last for a few years. It was meant to be an everlasting order, and until Jesus Christ comes the second time. This is why I say consecration absolutely is coming in our future. And it's simply going to be a dividing point that helps us decide whether we are choosing to have our oil filled or not, to be wise or to be foolish. Let's go now to verses 4 through 5. And in case you didn't realize how seriously the Lord takes this, because younger in my life, I thought the law of consecration was, it's nice. It's a temporal law. It's something to help the poor. It is not just about helping the poor, although that is certainly one of the effects of the law of consecration. It is absolutely the way beings live in the celestial kingdom. And so if we are serious about ever getting to the celestial kingdom, we have to be serious about the law of consecration. Let's go to verses 4 and 5. Quote, "Therefore, inasmuch as some of my servants have not kept the commandment, but have broken the covenant through covetousness, and with vain words, I have cursed them with a very sore and grievous curse. For I, the Lord, have decreed in my heart that inasmuch as any man belonging to the order shall be found a transgressor, or in other words, shall break the covenant with which ye are bound, he shall be cursed in his life, and shall be trodden down by whom I will." End quote. This is why the saints were driven out of Jackson County. This is why Zion's camp was not able to redeem them, is there were too many of the saints who were under this curse. And it is very serious to the Lord that we live the celestial law, because he wants us to not only think celestial, but to be and act celestial in every aspect of our lives. If we don't, we got to understand how serious it is. All right, verses 13 through 14. So this is how the Lord does the law of consecration in a very simple way. Quote, "For it is expedient that I, the Lord, should make every man accountable as a steward over earthly blessings, which I have made and prepared for my creatures. I, the Lord, stretched out the heavens and built the earth, my very handiwork, and all therein are mine." End quote. The Lord here is putting out two truths that undergird the law of consecration. One, everything that exists on this earth, including our bodies, is his. He built it, and it's his handiwork. He owns it. We have been made stewards over our bodies, over our time, our health, over the money that we inherited or that we worked for and gained. But we are stewards only, and we cannot take it with us to the next life. It will stay here. It's still the Lord's. Understand that the Lord holds us accountable. We know from the parable of the talents. The Lord holds us accountable as stewards over the talents he gives us. Those talents include our money, all of our property, all of our time, even our very health and bodies. So with that as the undergirding foundation, let's read verses 55 through 56. It's a little further in this same section. Quote, "Behold, all these properties are mine, or else your faith is vain, and ye are found hypocrites, and the covenants which ye have made unto me are broken. And if the properties are mine, then ye are stewards. Otherwise ye are no stewards, end quote. So once again, the Lord very emphatic here. This is my stuff. Even you are mine, but you're stewards, and you're going to be held accountable for your stewardship. And if you don't consecrate and you are in the covenant, and all of us who are baptized members of the church are within that covenant, then we are under the covenant to know this and to practice our stewardship. And then when you go to the temple, you're further under covenant to do this. Now, some of you, I'm sure, are saying in your mind right now, but wait, I thought the law of consecration was revoked and we have the law of tithing. Yes, the Lord in his mercy said, look, you guys haven't lived the law of consecration. I'm going to give you the United Order or the Order of Enoch or a lesser version. It's kind of in between, and see if you can live that. And the saints did try to live that in Utah, weren't successful at it. They tried it in Kirtland, weren't successful at it. So then the Lord gave us the law of tithing. And originally in the law of tithing, you didn't just give 10% of every paycheck. You also, when you first entered into the church, gave away all your surplus. So everything that wasn't absolutely necessary for you and your family situation. And how many of us do that now? Nobody. So we are living a much lesser version. We're living like a Aaronic priesthood version of the Lord's law of consecration in tithing as we live it today. Yes, that's what we're under. But the time is going to come when that's going to change, and we've got to be ready for that. All right, this comes from Brigham Young in June of 1855, Journal of Discourses 2, quote, when the Lord gave the revelation instructing us in our duty as to consecrating what we have, if the people then could have understood things precisely as they are and had obeyed that revelation, it would have been neither more nor less than yielding up that which is not their own to him to whom it belongs. When the saints find out the truth as it is, they will learn that they have nothing to consecrate in reality, that they have nothing to give the Lord because they hold nothing but what already belongs to him, end quote. Neal A. Maxwell, one of my favorite modern apostles, said that in the end, nothing we have can really be given to the Lord, and so we can't really sacrifice anything to him. The only thing we uniquely have that is ours to give is our agency. And by yielding up our hearts and giving our agency to him to be obedient to whatever he guides us in, that's really the only thing that's uniquely ours to give. And the law of consecration is about getting us to that point where we can do that.
Let's go to verses 15 through 16 and read about what God's purpose is in the law of consecration. Quote, and it is my purpose to provide for my saints, for all things are mine, but it must needs be done in my own way. And behold, this is the way that I, the Lord, have decreed to provide for my saints, that the poor shall be exalted, and that the rich are made low. For the earth is full, and there is enough, and to spare. Yea, I prepared all things, and have given unto the children of men to be agents unto themselves. End quote. The Lord here is saying that the big purpose of consecration is to provide for his saints. First of all, he's going to provide unity. So unity is a oneness. And the Lord, of course, says in multiple places that if we're not one, we're not his. So this oneness needs to be done his way. And the way he begins this is by providing temporally an equal opportunity to all saints. It doesn't mean that he's going to necessarily provide exactly the same amount of temporal resources to all saints, but simply that he's going to provide for them those things that will allow the poor to be exalted and the rich to be humbled. Let's go and look again at being stewards or agents. The Lord wants to give the opportunity to us to be good stewards or agents unto ourselves. So the law of consecration provides this opportunity because in the law of consecration you have an accounting where you give an account of your stewardship on some basis. It could be yearly or some other time basis. And during that, you actually give an account of here's what I've done in my stewardship. And then in that account, you can either give back surplus and say I've earned more than I need. Here's more surplus to be put into the treasury, or you can receive if you don't have enough. In other words, man, maybe there was a fire or I lost my crops. And so now a surplus is given back to you from the treasury to make up for that loss. Let's go now to verses 21. This is how common consent works within consecration. Quote, "And let all things be done according to the counsel of the order, and united consent or voice of the order which dwell in the land of Kirtland." End quote. One of the purposes was to create union or oneness, and so the order would do things by common consent. For instance, perhaps the order would say, we need a new park, or we need a new road. All of those things could be decided by the order and then could be done, and everyone would have a say in that. Think about how common consent works in the church today. You usually have a bishop and his counselors. They would make a decision through inspiration, and then they would bring that decision to the body of the church and say, hey, we'd like everyone sustaining vote. Is there anyone who does not sustain this? Then come talk to us afterwards and we'll listen to that. That is how I would imagine common consent would work within the law of consecration as well. Verse 48, quote, "After you are organized, you shall be called the United Order of the Stake of Zion, the city of Kirtland. And your brethren, after they are organized, shall be called the United Order of the city of Zion." End quote. So here the Lord is dividing the stake of Kirtland from the city of Zion into different United Order groups. The purpose of this was to create a small enough group that people could have common consent, that they could know what the needs were in their community, their group. Now let's go to verse 62, and this is reinforcing this idea that consecration really is about unity and not division. Quote, "And there shall be a seal upon the treasury, and all the sacred things shall be delivered into the treasury, and no man among you shall call it his own, or any part of it, for it shall belong to you all with one accord." End quote. The idea is this treasury of the surpluses is not any one person's, but it's everyone's to be used as needed. This idea is different from other ideas that people have had about dividing up property. Often governments will do this. They'll say, well, things are not equal in our country, so we're just going to divide up all the resources and give everybody an equal division of that resource. That's not the way the law of consecration was meant to happen. And we can see that also here in verse 72, a little further. "And this shall be the voice and common consent of the order, that any man among you say to the treasurer, I have need of this to help me in my stewardship." End quote. So you can see here, anyone in the order could then go to the treasurer who is in charge of the surpluses and say, hey, this is what I need in my stewardship. And that unity is that everyone could call upon it. And this is different, like I said, from the idea of just an equal division, because some people certainly might get more resources. Maybe they were really good at managing those resources, or they had a particular field of work where they needed more resources. This is a quote from Orson Pratt from September 1854, Journal of Discourses, Volume 2. Quote, "No equality can be brought about by dividing property. The Lord never intended such an order of things. It is not a division of property that is going to bring about a oneness among the Latter-day Saints in temporal things, but it is a union of property, that all the property may be united and considered belonging to the Lord, and to every individual in the whole church as joint heirs with him, or as his stewards." End quote. The law of consecration is meant to be a way for all of us to have equal access to the things that we need, not that all of us have an exactly equal stewardship. Now let's go to verse 68. Quote, "And all monies that you receive in your stewardships, by improving upon the properties which I have appointed unto you, in houses or in lands or in cattle, or in all things save it be the holy and sacred writings which I have reserved unto myself for holy and sacred purposes, shall be cast into the treasury as fast as you receive monies, by hundreds or by fifties or by twenties or by tens or by fives." End quote. So here the individual stewards of these different stewardships, as soon as they have a surplus again, then they can cast that surplus back into the treasury. The purpose for doing this is that you as a steward feel joy in giving back and multiplying your talents. So really think of the parable of the talents here. You have some stewards with 5 talents, some with 3 talents, some with 1 talent. The important thing is that you want to, if you're unified, be creating more talents. And you want to rejoice in putting those talents back into the Lord's hands because they're all His anyways. What you have as your stewardship as well as whatever extra you make. And as you do that, you know you are blessing your brothers and sisters in the law of consecration. This is the way that individual motivation is still kept within the law of consecration. Let's go now to D&C 105. So this is the other end of the sandwich of the redemption of Zion. This is after Zion's camp has been gathered by Joseph Smith, and he receives this revelation, and it is a disappointment to some in Zion's camp because they feel like we didn't accomplish the Lord's mission. We didn't redeem with power. We didn't see the Lord's power to that degree, and we, of course, didn't put the saints back on their lands. Now, the Lord is going to do that in the future, but there was a purpose to Zion's camp. And in these verses, we're going to see that. But more importantly, I want us to think of these things as a revelation for us today of what's going to happen in the future, because there are things still in futurity that need to be accomplished. And there's things we can learn from this to prepare for building up Zion, which is going to be necessary prior to the second coming. Verses 3 through 6. Quote, "But behold, they," and this means the saints in Missouri who have been dispossessed of their lands, "but behold, they have not learned to be obedient to the things which I required at their hands, but are full of all manner of evil, and do not impart of their substance as becometh saints to the poor and afflicted among them, and are not united according to the union required by the law of the celestial kingdom. And Zion cannot be built up unless it is by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom. Otherwise I cannot receive her unto myself. And my people must needs be chastened until they learn obedience, if it must needs be by the things which they suffer." So the Lord here giving an explanation of why the saints in Missouri were not receiving the help from Zion's camp, and why now wasn't the time back then to redeem Zion. But he also gives some important reasons here that we can learn from. We have to start thinking in our mind of how we impart our substance with the idea that it's all the Lord's anyways. And are we imparting of our substance as becometh saints to the poor and the afflicted among us? We can start thinking about that right now. I mean, each of us has the opportunity to go beyond the tithing that we pay and make offerings. And those financial offerings are a way that we could give back of our surplus. So we can start taking stewardship of that right now. And this idea of union here, of oneness, this is really key, because the idea of giving of our substance temporally to the Lord to a greater degree to help others within our community, within the kingdom, is part of what is necessary to create this oneness. That is what the Lord wants us to get to. And these are really the laws of the celestial kingdom. If we want to be co-heirs with Christ and inherit everything that Christ has, we have to be willing to live with this kind of oneness. Here's the question. The chastisement that these early saints were under, are we still under that as a church? Are we not united in all things? Are we imparting of our substance to the poor and the afflicted in the way that the law of consecration would ask of us, even if we can't live it as communities yet? So these are the principles of the celestial kingdom, and this chastening here, this is something that I want you to think about. Are we still under that? Let's go now to verses 9 through 11. Quote, "Therefore, in consequence of the transgressions of my people, it is expedient in me that mine elders should wait for a little season for the redemption of Zion, that they themselves may be prepared, and that my people may be taught more perfectly, and have experience, and know more perfectly concerning their duty in the things which I require at their hands. And this cannot be brought to pass until mine elders are endowed with power from on high." End quote. Of course, we know that the endowment had not been revealed at this time in the temple, and so that was a promise that has been fulfilled. And many in the church have received their endowments. Of course, not all. So that is something that as a church, we still need to help more of our brothers and sisters understand and be able to live up to the time when they can receive their endowments and the powers thereof. Also, this idea of preparing yourselves, being taught, and understanding more perfectly how to fulfill our callings. These are the things that we can be doing to follow President Nelson's promptings from the Lord to us to prepare for the second coming. So this idea that we have to wait for a little season. We know, of course, that since D&C 105 was revealed in the 1830s, it's been a little season and then some. So the time is coming when this promise of the Lord is going to be fulfilled, that we don't have to wait a little season any longer. And that will come at the appropriate time. We'll hear it through our leaders. Here's something that's comforting in verse 14 through 15. God says he can fight our battles. Quote, "For behold, I do not require at their hands to fight the battles of Zion. For as I said in a former commandment, even so will I fulfill. I will fight your battles. Behold, the destroyer I have sent forth to destroy, and lay waste mine enemies, and not many years hence they shall not be left to pollute mine heritage, and to blaspheme my name upon the lands which I have consecrated for the gathering together of my saints." End quote. So the Lord here obviously did send the destroyer to Missouri through the Civil War. So the Lord did fight those battles for them. They weren't required as the Camp of Zion to go and fight. In our lives, I would ask you, does the Lord always fight our battles? Sometimes we may think that we need to do everything ourselves, and sometimes we may think that the Lord needs to do it all for us. So there's kind of a happy medium there. Certainly, when it's things that we individually need to do, we need to go out there and go to work, and then the Lord blesses us in that work. But when it comes to actual battles, literally fighting like as a war, here the Lord is saying that he will fight our battles for us. And we will see that in the promises he already gave when he leads the children of Israel with one like unto Moses. Look at what the Israelites went through in getting out of Egypt. The Lord fought those battles for them. Let's go now to verse 27. Here again, this same reference back to Egypt. Quote, "And I will soften the hearts of the people, as I did the heart of Pharaoh, from time to time, until my servant Joseph Smith Jr. and mine elders, whom I have appointed, shall have time to gather up the strength of my house." End quote. Why did the Lord use the name of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, anciently, in this particular verse where he's talking about America and redeeming the land of Zion? Well, the Lord, like I said, uses parallels. And this connection between Pharaoh and America is something that you will see throughout the scriptures. And modern apostles and prophets often have made this connection between Pharaoh and the President of the United States, between Egypt and America. For instance, Heber C. Kimball several times in his talks uses Pharaoh as a way to designate the President of the United States at that time. So this connection is there because there is a similarity or a type between Egypt and America. America has within it this nation of the Latter-day Saints, and they were literally trying to become the kingdom of God in Missouri. And Egypt, of course, had within it the nation of Israel, and they were supposed to be living the gospel there within a wicked nation, Egypt. So there really is a lot of parallels there. And of course, as we know, the Lord is going to call a prophet to lead the people as Moses did out of Egypt, but in this case, out of a wicked America into Jackson County, Missouri, to build the New Jerusalem and to create Zion there. And so this idea of being a people within a larger people, of being a people of God within those who are not full followers of God, is where this type and shadow comes from. You'll see this in Isaiah a lot. So when you look at Old Testament prophecies, Nephi also uses this, you will see often Egypt being equated to latter-day America, a wicked country within which live the people of God. Let's go now to verses 30 through 32. The Lord uses this phrase, fair as the sun, clear as the moon. I want you to think about what that is describing there. Quote, "And after these lands are purchased, I will hold the armies of Israel guiltless in taking possession of their own lands, which they have previously purchased with their monies, and of throwing down the towers of mine enemies that may be upon them, and scattering their watchmen, and avenging me of mine enemies, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. But first let my army become very great, and let it be sanctified before me, that it may become fair as the sun, and clear as the moon, and that her banners may be terrible unto all nations, that the kingdoms of this world may be constrained to acknowledge that the kingdom of Zion is in very deed the kingdom of our God and his Christ. Therefore let us become subject unto her laws." End quote. A beautiful set of verses there that talks about this future time that the Lord is pointing us forward to look at, where the Lord's army becomes fair as the sun, clear as the moon. And he describes that in this verse 31 here, being sanctified before God. So that's part of what it means to become fair as the sun and clear as the moon. And that it becomes terrible to the nations of the world. Terrible, in other words, something that they respect and that they are afraid of. They know it is powerful. So this is what the Lord's army needs to become to fulfill this idea of being fair as the sun and clear as the moon. And the people of the kingdoms of the world need to realize that the Lord's army is really the kingdom of God and Christ. And so we have to be that example. So one other thing that you can look at as far as the definition of this fair as the sun and clear as the moon is realize that Zion, the New Jerusalem, is going to consist of people who are of a celestial and a terrestrial nature. It will not have telestial people within it. In other words, it will not have the wicked within it. But fair as the sun, of course, is symbolic of the celestial. And clear as the moon is symbolic of the terrestrial. So both of those types of people will be welcome to live within Zion. So not everyone will necessarily be of a celestial nature. Some will still be coming along. And many of the Gentiles, the Lord prophesies, will flee to Zion because they don't want to be involved in the civil strife that is going on in the rest of America at that time. This is really a very descriptive phrase for the armies of Zion, that they have within it both the celestial and the terrestrial, and they have a place there. Now let's go to verses 35 through 37. So the question here is, I want you to ask yourself, when is this day of choosing that the Lord is talking about in these verses, and who will be chosen? Quote, "There has been a day of calling, but the time is come for a day of choosing, and let those be chosen that are worthy. And it shall manifest unto my servant by the voice of the Spirit those that are chosen, and they shall be sanctified. And inasmuch as they follow the counsel which they receive, they shall have power after many days to accomplish all things pertaining to Zion." End quote. So after many days might be similar to the Lord saying that he wants us to wait a little season. So this choosing could be a number of things. But when is this going to happen? Once again, it could be several different manifestations of this time of choosing. A couple that I thought of is it could be the choosing of the 144,000. So we know that during the sixth seal, which we're in right now, the 6,000 years, the 144,000 are chosen. So that could be part of the choosing. And so the Lord's servants might choose those who are going to be in the 144,000. That could be one interpretation of this. Another one might be the parable of the wise virgins. So who is chosen to go back and build up the New Jerusalem? That we talked about. Joseph Smith, it looks like he will come back and have some role in the choosing of who's going to go back and redeem Zion. So that could be another interpretation. There could be several interpretations of this, but the Lord here is saying that coming in the future, there's going to be this day of choosing, and that could have already started, or it could be something completely in the future. But what will those chosen do? Well, look here to Moses 7:62. Here's a possible interpretation. Quote, "And righteousness will I send down out of heaven, and truth will I send forth out of the earth, to bear testimony of mine only begotten, his resurrection from the dead, and yea, also the resurrection of all men, And righteousness and truth will I cause to sweep the earth as with a flood, to gather out mine elect from the four quarters of the earth unto a place which I shall prepare, an holy city, that my people may gird up their loins and be looking forth for the time of my coming. For there shall be my tabernacle, and it shall be called Zion, a new Jerusalem." End quote. This could be something that is to come, where the 144,000 could be both those sent down out of heaven or resurrected beings, as well as truth be those who are translated and become part of the 144,000. And both the resurrected and the translated would bear testimony of Christ and would then go out into the world after the New Jerusalem has been formed and the 144,000 called and sent during the grape harvest years, the last maybe 2-3 years, and they would be gathering out the last of the elect to the New Jerusalem. This, of course, requires that the New Jerusalem be built, so this time of choosing. But this would be one of the things that those chosen would be doing this last missionary work before the second coming of Christ to the world, which wipes out all of the telestial and all that is wicked on the world. So the last thing I want us to think about here is verse 39. "And lift up an ensign of peace, and make a proclamation of peace unto the ends of the earth." End quote. You look at what the church has done, and ever since this time in Missouri, the leaders of the church have lifted up this ensign of peace as commanded by the Lord. And you look at up to very recently, President Nelson's talks have spoken again and again about being peacemakers. So the Lord wants us to be sanctified. He wants us to be examples if we're to be a part of his army. And he wants that to be an army of peace. And so we can go and prepare by being those peacemakers right now and making that proclamation of peace when there is division and hatred and fighting around us. We can do that. I know that the Lord Jesus Christ is coming soon, that the time for us to prepare is now, and that these are ways that we've read in D&C 103 through 105 that we can start preparing and understand what the Lord has in store in the future so that we can be looking forth for each of those signs to happen. And as they do, our faith will grow stronger. If you're listening to this, I know you are also looking forth for the signs of the coming of Jesus Christ. And I hope that you feel encouraged in your preparations, because there are many people, just like you, just like me, who are out there trying to follow him, trying to consecrate ourselves, trying to learn and live his gospel better. And together, we are going to become more and more sanctified till we are gathered again in a physical place, and we're able to see the face of the Lord, to receive his blessings in far greater measure. And I would give one last invitation to you. Make sure that you really listen in and study, take notes from General Conference coming up in a week. There is so much there for us to be blessed by. I'm excited about what is to come. And I know that that's going to come through our living senior apostle and the prophets and apostles that we sustain in General Conference. So look to their words and follow those. I leave you this testimony that as we look to the words of our living apostles and prophets and follow them, we are following Jesus Christ, and we are looking to him in all that we do. I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.